Welcome to Blackbird. This is our segment on privilege and the judicial system or the prison system or arrests, however you want to think about it in your brain. It's me and Micah today. Holidays and busyness and brain capacity are affecting our other our other participants. So welcome, and we're gonna talk about that today. Before we do that, Micah's going to do a little housekeeping, but this is pre-recorded, so there's probably not much there.
I think we're just our general, join the Facebook group, ask Megan questions, suggest things, tell us what a good job we're doing. There's going to be a link in the description for the Facebook group. We're going to have links to a couple of articles and a podcast that Elizabeth found for us. So, comment, share, ask questions.
It's a growing thing. You listen, you grow, you ask questions. That's what they say in school, right? Like when you can ask questions, that means you absorb the information. All right, so we're going to talk about two main things when it comes to the judicial system and how it works and how privilege is integrated into it. So we're going to start with a brief history of the police and how it was formed in the United States and sort of its background. Micah, do you want to go first? Do you want me to start?
I'm really excited. I want to do a plug for the 1619 project. One of the articles that I found is in that project. So the project is by the New York Times Magazine. It came out in 2019 to coincide with the 400-year anniversary of the brought to America. A series of articles that cover the gamut. Like it covers like sports and medicine and the prison system. It's really good. I think everyone should get into it. So that was one of the articles that I found. And the other one is called Rooted in Slavery, Prison Labor Exploitation, which came out in 2007. So the prison system that I didn't know until recently is that the system wasn't really a thing until slavery was abolished. So you had prisons and jails, but you didn't have this like statewide mandated system going on. And I think it's really telling that we didn't have that until slavery was over.
It is really telling. It's like, what do we do now when we can't just punish them willy-nilly?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly right. So there are a couple things that went on. So we abolished slavery except for people who are already in prison, which is a little scary. And then there were the black codes that came out. So the black codes were trying to control the movement of black people. So they were sort of made up laws, right? So it was like these black men are congregating on the corner and that's illegal.
Yes.
Or this.
No, you're good. So because I obviously read those things too, and a lot of what codes was a way to get around the 13th Amendment.
Yeah.
So by criminalizing normal behavior, except for if you're black, and that's a lot of what the justice system is about. It's fine unless you're black. So like congregating or just random shit that people do every day, all of the time, was suddenly criminalized. And then if they criminalized it, then they could, because the loophole in the 13th Amendment didn't outlaw slavery for criminals.
Yeah.
So if you committed a crime, you could then be returned to a form of slavery, prison or jail. And so that's how they got around that loophole of you can't have slaves anymore. And they're like, well, we'll just make it so that whatever you do, we can potentially punish you for.
One of the black codes was trying to get a job without a letter of freedom essentially from your former slave owner, which clearly is only affecting Black people. Like blatantly, no one else is going to have this problem.
Right.
And the other thing that I read about was the practice of leasing prisoners, right? So plantation owners, business owners, if they needed free labor, they would pay the state for prisoners and then work them on the plantation. So, okay, you're Black, you get freed. You are loitering on the street, you go to prison, someone pays for you, you go back to the plant. That's exactly slavery. You got, and you're picking cotton again.
That's like exactly slavery. So one of the things that I was looking for, so if you rewind a little bit, during slavery, you had I forget the name, slave patrols. So during slavery, you had slave patrols, and the slave patrols were groups of men, white men, obviously, who um, could legally stop you and deal out punishment. So there was no like right to an attorney or a trial or anything. If you were Black and you were somewhere where they didn't think you should be, they could beat you, kill you, whatever, return you to your plantation with no real reason other than you were somewhere that you didn't belong. And the thing that I found really interesting about that was that these men were paid. In some states, it's at like 5 cents an hour or a day or whatever, and that if you didn't participate, you could be fined anywhere from $5 to $10. And that's a lot of money. Like in this time period, that's a lot of money. Money most people don't have unless they own a plantation. And if they own a plantation, it's in their best interest to be on a slave patrol. So there you go. Um, I thought it was also interesting that these were, they make a note of it in one of the articles, and I think it is a real reason, really telling of, the inequity in America and the otherness of minorities, especially Blacks, of that it sort of like what do you like being summoned for a jury, right? It was sort of that kind of thing. So like even if you didn't own slaves, you had to serve on this. If you had no interest in anything about slavery, like you were a mason or you owned a farm but you didn't have slaves because you were too poor, you still had to serve in some states up to a year on these slave patrols. And think it's really interesting and very telling that it creates that otherness. It creates that fear, right? So if you're a person, you're a white male, you don't really care about slavery, you don't own slaves, you have nothing to do with that, and then you're put on the slave patrol and you get indoctrinated, right? Like these people are doing bad things. And so it puts you, as a innocent bystander, you then get indoctrinated into this prejudice against Blacks and slaves. And a big part of the slave patrol was fear. So if you were Black and carrying a torch in the forest, you're automatically, I think they said up to 30 lashes.
Whoa.
If they caught you at night with a torch, you were getting 30 lashes. Um, and that's fear-based, right? Because as a white person, it's why are you in the forest at night? You're going to incite anarchy. You're going to burn something down. You're going to destroy property. Not like it's dark and you need light, but like you're going to destroy something, therefore. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think really goes to show how it indoctrinated everyone, right? So you might have a slave owner who has an opinion and a non-slave owner who doesn't really care, but then you serve on this slave patrol and you get indoctrinated into this system. And then, whereas maybe you didn't have any prejudice before, now you do.
Yeah. Or maybe you like start to doubt yourself a little bit, and maybe like I'm hanging out with this group of people, and maybe they're right.
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah. And it's I think it's, I mean, in my head, it's done strategically, right? Because you want to belong, right? You don't want to be the guy who's like, this isn't a good idea, because then you're othered also. So that's your choice, right? Is and that's a hard choice. It's a hard choice for a lot of people to stand up and say no to a big group of people,
Yeah. Especially because it might hurt you, it might hurt your family.
right?
That's,
So I found that really, really interesting about the slave patrols in the southern states. And so they operated all the way up to, and I didn't realize this because I assumed that they, during the Civil War, they would have stopped. But no. And so, slave patrols were in existence until the Confederacy surrendered.
okay. So the whole Civil War, they're still going, oh man.
It's still going on, which is, and especially if you think about, like in Texas, where we celebrate Juneteenth, which is when Texas realized. So you still have these slave patrols, and these people are free. They're allowed now to move about the country, but there are still slave patrols doing the things that they've been doing the whole time.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. So back to black. Fast forward back to black codes. um, so yeah, you were saying about black codes and crime.
And it feels it's all very reactionary, and it got more intense during Reconstruction, when Black people were being nominated or elected into serious seats of power, and then you saw this backlash. So I don't know how you can look at this and not see like there is a very clear correlation between Black people having the freedom to move about the country and to be in elected positions and to own property and be happy functioning people, and there's this huge backlash, and that continues to this day. And I think it's like maybe it's not as obvious, but once you have the history behind like why these prison systems are like where they came from, why they're in place, it becomes a little bit more obvious. And then and we're going to talk about how the system is totally rigged against people of color, and it becomes, I think, even more obvious.
So you have black codes, like you were saying, and then we move on to what's next. Just like my brain is like, I know what I'm talking. I know the word, but it's just gone.
I'm not going to help you.
Anyway, Mike, if you have something to say right now, that'd be great while I figure out what my brain was thinking about.
And starting this research, I found some sort of basic stats on who's in prison right now. So the United States is about 4% of the entire population of the world, but we have 22% of imprisoned people in the world. So that is completely out of whack. And that happened, there was an explosion in the 1970s, 1980s. So in the 1970s, the prisons in America held fewer than 300,000 people. But since then, there's grown to 2.2 million that are in prison, and then an additional 4.5 million who are on probation or parole. According to the Bureau of Prison Statistics, 1 out of every 32 adults is in prison. So 1 out of 32 people are in prison, or in jail on probation or parole at the end of 2005. And African American men tend to be more targeted than like the most targeted group as far as this goes.
Mhm.
So African American men between the ages of 20 and 39 account for nearly a third of all sentence prisoners, which is bananas because we know the percentage of African Americans in general is really low. It's like 18 or 20%.
I think it's 13% of the
Okay,
population.
even lower than I was thinking. So there's 13% of the total population, but they account for a third of people who are currently in prison, um, which is crazy.
Yeah. And I think it's really important. So like in the things that was looking at when it came to that is we're talking like yes, we're talking about a range of crimes, right? We're talking about anything from, you know, what you're, selling pot or getting caught with a joint up to murder, which is a pretty wide range.
Yeah.
But um so something that I found really interesting is when I was looking at it is that when it comes to drugs, which they've done studies on, and white people do drugs at the same rate as African Americans and people of color, but people of color are more likely to be put in jail for it,
Yeah.
um, which I think is a really, for me, I'm like, just legalize marijuana and we'll cut down like half of that. um,
I think that's an interesting thing that I didn't really get to research, but about the war on drugs.
oh,
And I think the war on drugs is pretty linked to discriminating against people of color.
yeah.
And I don't have any hard proof or numbers for that, but
Well, so from what I have read, and this, like I read it a while ago. So during the war on drugs is when stop and frisk became popular,
yeah,
and so bad neighborhoods, which tend to be black, and so you have a joint on you or whatever, and you're just walking. The police now have the ability to just stop you and search you for no reason, just cause. And so if you have something on you, you're going to jail. And so that was a big part of the war on drugs and where stop and frisk became really popular or widely used, I guess I should say, because the idea being supposedly to keep drugs off the street,
yeah,
really just to incarcerate more minorities because they weren't stopping and frisking white people.
right.
Um, so,
I don't, we're sort of getting into this anyway. So the one of the studies that we're talking about how the system is totally rigged, and against people of color. So in Kansas City, they did a study between 2003 and 2004. And so Kansas City distinguished between traffic safety stops, which is like that guy ran a light or his blinkers out or something like that, versus investigatory stops, which is I think there's something going on. I want to check this person out.
mhm.
Um, so for drivers under the age of 25, 28% of Black men experienced the investigatory traffic stop, 17% of Black women, 13 of white men, and 7% of white women. So there's a difference between that person broke the law and that person's driving while Black.
Right.
It's a joke, but it's a real thing. These people are being stopped because of what they look like, not because the police officer saw them do something illegal.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And yeah, I think it's important to note that some of the jokes, like some jokes are funny because they're true. Some jokes are not funny because they're true. And that's one of them, like driving while black. Like because it happens. It still happens. It
Yeah.
happens all the time.
I,
Um,
investigatory stops, it sounds like a good idea, right? It sounds like one of those things that wouldn't be related to a bias, but it's another opportunity for police to be like, oh, he looked suspicious, to be able to pull over more minorities.
right.
And in general, they found so when people are pulled over, people of color are more likely to be searched than white people. But when white people are searched, they are more often found with contraband, so either with drugs or guns or something they shouldn't have, than people of color. Even though, like, you think at some point the cops would be like, "Oh, well, we're busting more white people with shit. We should stop more white people." But that is, clearly not what has happened.
Clearly not what happened. On a related, like as a related story, when I lived in Missouri, I was pulled over several times. I went out all the time, and I worked the night shift. um, but I was searched. My car was searched twice out of these times. Um, so then it becomes like, okay, like if you're stopping me because my tail light is out, why are you searching my car?
Yeah, that's just the excuse to get into your car.
Exactly. And I can hear you guys out there screaming already. You don't have to let them search your car. Like, no, I didn't have to let them search my car. But as a Black person, if I say you can't, then that's another reason for them to search my car.
I think particularly because I assume that you were alone. So if you're alone, a person of color, and in the middle of very white Missouri, like if you say no, you might have much bigger problems.
Yes. And that's the fear, right?
Yeah.
That is ingrained in people of color, is that if I say no, I will end up in more trouble. I know I'm innocent, so I'm just going to say yes.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I know that it's not right for them to handcuff me and I haven't done anything wrong, but I'm going to do it because I don't want something worse to happen.
Yeah. And that fear, I think, is not unfounded because we see it all the time, right?
Yeah.
We see it in people who go jogging down in Florida or wherever that was, or like selling loose cigarettes or coming out of a convenience store.
Yeah. Asking a police officer to help you because your car is broken.
Yeah.
All of these things contribute to that fear, and it's not un. And I think if those of you who are out there who are watching, ask your Black friend if they know anyone or if it's happened to them. I guarantee you, they either know someone or it's happened to someone they know, where they have been searched or handcuffed for no reason.
It was a really great article that I read. There's going to be a link, and it's long. There's a lot to. But in their study, they did a survey, and 49% of Black men reported being arrested by the age of 23. So half of the men they surveyed, which is a lot higher, like the percentage, and then a lot younger as well, right? You would think, oh, I don't even want to like think about it, but like you think like maybe over a lifetime, people, but under the age of 23. So they're going after young men.
Yes. Yeah. It's so when we were talking about school and so we're talking about like the school to prison pipeline or the school to
Yeah.
when you think about that, as far as like punishment in school goes, um, the they're relatively similar from like pre-K up to junior high. And then junior high through high school, you start to see the disparity just grow and grow. And the only reason I can think of that is because they're turning into scary young Black men.
Yeah.
Because that's how we perceive Black men in America, is that they're scary or they're going to hurt you. And so it starts, yeah, like junior high into high school, you start to see this widening gap of disciplinary actions. And so then it leads to what you're talking about is, Black men under 23 being stopped and arrested. So it's really troubling. It's interesting to look at these things and find them out, and it's also sad to be like, oh my God, it's so much worse than I thought it was.
That's a good way to put it. It's so much worse than I thought it was. Like I knew it was bad. I think that sort of leads into like inherent biases, right? So like we all have inherent biases, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person at all, but like it's a good thing to like catch yourself and correct your thinking. Um, but so this article like went further into inherent biases and how it affects the criminal justice system.
Mm.
So federal prosecutors are twice as likely to charge African Americans with offenses that carry mandatory minimum sentences to their white counterparts. Judges who are supposed to be impartial, right, are more likely to sentence people of color than whites to prison and jail for longer sentences, even for same crimes. And then I didn't write it down, but juries that aren't like that are mostly white, essentially, that don't have a good like mix of people, tend to look at evidence and jump to more conclusions about what happened. Where if it's a white person on trial, they tend to be like, oh, like maybe something else was going on, like give the benefit of a doubt, essentially. And then juvenile probation officers, which I think goes back to like the scary young black men that you're talking about. Juvenile probation officers attribute problems of white youth to their social environments, but for black youth are their attitudes and their personalities. Like they had bad attitudes and like they were bound to get in trouble, right? But for white people, it's like, oh, they had a rough upbringing, or it's not good at home or something. And it's scary because these people who we think are fair and impartial have these biases, and aren't realizing it, or they're racist and they're playing into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important to note and to think about. It's like we talked about it a little bit when we were talking about education, is that everyone's got these biases, wherever they might come from, social media, your peer groups, your environment that you were raised in. Everyone has these biases, and like you're saying, with like judges and attorneys and like juries, they're regular people. You assume they have biases. But when it comes to like, these people that we've put in power to be impartial, they do have bias. So we talked about that too when we were talking about education, is that teachers they're people.
Yeah.
They're not perfect people. They have inherent bias by way of being a person in the world.
Yeah.
And so that's part of how it infiltrates. I think with the judicial system, as we in our brief history, it's built in. Yeah. From the beginning. Which is probably why it's so much worse, right? Is because that's where it started.
Yeah, there's part of like it's always been there and maybe you don't see it, or it's always been there, so why change it? Or it's always been there and I don't see the racism in it. Or like, and also like things like I think prisons and prisoners and in general, like is one of those subjects that you don't want to think about, like you assume people who are in prison are meant to be there. That they're scary people, or and you don't want to think about it. Like they're safely tucked away in the.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. It's like they're bad people and they deserve to be there. And I don't have to think about how they're being treated while they're in there or what's going on in there, because they're bad people and they deserve it.
Yeah.
Then that's the inherent thing, right? And I think that's the resistance for judicial reform, is because that's what we all think. Like they're bad people and they deserve to be in there. So why do we need to fix it? And the reason we need to fix it is that they don't all deserve to be there.
Or like in some instances, I'm gonna say a lot of instances right now with COVID. If you haven't read anything about like COVID in prisons, it's bananas. Yeah, it's awful. And even if you are a terrible person, you don't. Right. What's going on, you don't deserve.
Yeah. Cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah. Like as a society, we have an obligation to people. I feel like if we're gonna put you in a cell, then like you need food, water, and medical help when you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would 100% agree with that. Um, like, I think I remember last summer, maybe it was, there was a prison here in Dallas or in Dallas somewhere, one of the prisons in Texas.
Yeah.
A whole wing didn't have air conditioning,
Ooh.
and these are they're prisons. They don't have windows. Like it was very hot in there, and nobody cared.
Yeah.
um, because you're a criminal. um,
I
so I
think
think that's really interesting.
there's also the argument of like if you treat people like human beings, they're more likely to um, be able to integrate back into society.
Right.
Um, so like we're also, I feel like the prison systems in America are shooting themselves in the foot by not investing in the people and in like education programs and like um, skills that they can learn or whatever. Like it's not helping the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a lot of that is that now a lot of states have privatized prisons, and there's big money to be made
Big money.
in in owning a prison because you can do the bare minimum and no one is going to say anything to you, and you can make big money. And a lot of states pay these private companies per prisoner, so it's in their interest to keep people in there and, in a way, make sure that the people who get out come back. So that's a huge flaw. Regarding that, I would say if there's a show called Adam Ruins Everything, and they did an episode on the judicial system, and it's really, really good. Um, the only reason I recommend it is because on the show they cite all of their information, so you know they're not just like pulling shit from nowhere. They tell you where they get their information, and so they're not just spewing leftisms or whatever at you. They're telling you facts about how the judicial system works. Um, and they did a part we were talking about judges where like attorneys will tell their black clients like, if you have dreadlocks, you need to shave them. If you find a suit, right? Like find a suit anywhere you can. Um, Wear glasses. Like even if you don't wear glasses, like put them on
Wow.
because juries are more sympathetic to people who wear glasses.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to fight. Like look this way and do this thing so that you don't get sent to jail.
On the trial end of it, one of the things I found, so at least in 2015, like to be fair, this article's a little old, but in 2015, 60% of people who are currently in jail were being detained prior to trial, which means they couldn't like pay their bail or their bail, they didn't have it. Apparently, if you are detained before trial, you're more likely to be convicted. I think it's the idea of like it looks bad,
Yeah,
essentially. Like you already were in jail, so you're just going back.
you were already there, so
People who are detained awaiting trial are more likely to accept less favorable plea deals. They're more likely to be sentenced to prison, and they're more likely to receive longer sentences.
yeah.
70% of pretrial releases require a bond, which is especially high hurdle for low-income defendants who are disproportionately people of color. Blacks and Latinos are more likely than whites to be denied bail, to have a higher bail, and to be detained because they cannot pay their bail. So you have this, like, if you stay in prison before your trial, you're more likely to be convicted. Oh, by the way, if you're not white, it's really, really hard to get your bond and to pay for it.
Which I think is sort of crazy to me because the whole idea of like bond and bailing out is that or I feel like, and maybe this is just I watch too much television. I don't know. But like they said it so that like if you're someone who's likely to run, you can't like it's so high that you can't pay
Yeah.
it. Or it's so high that if you do pay it, you won't run because it's so much money.
Yeah.
Um, and so the idea of setting a bail for someone who is poor and has nowhere to run to is kind of ridiculous.
That's a good point. Like if you don't have the money for the bail, you probably don't have the money to run to Mexico.
Right. Um, so, um, what else? You want to talk about prison system some more? Or,
Thing I have left is the banana situation in the Louisiana State Penitentiary.
all right. So well, why don't you go ahead and tell that story and then we'll talk about shootings. Oh, crap. We're gonna have to put this on pause because apparently my computer is dying.
Oh, okay.
When we started, I had 50%, and now I'm at 9.
Okay.
So. Sorry for the fart noises. It wasn't.
So the Louisiana State Penitentiary, which is also known as Angola, is on several old slave plantations. It like acreage-wise is larger than Manhattan.
Wow.
Yeah. So the guy that read this article, Bryan Stevenson, was a lawyer, or is a lawyer, and he was working on the behalf of some clients and in Angola. Some of them who were like kids and were caught stealing or caught selling pot and had gone to Angola. In Angola, they have nicknamed it a gated community, but it really is like a tiny city that operates. They have a hospice that Oprah did a documentary about. They have fields where they grow like lettuce and like words. They grow food to sell. They make license plates. They make coffins. They have church services. Like it is like a tiny city. Um, they also pick cotton. And the guards ride around on horses and they have shotguns. Uh, yeah. Uh, so if they don't, the disciplinary records that the lawyer looked into show that if they refused to pick cotton or didn't pick it fast enough, they could be punished with time in the hole where food was restricted and inmates were sometimes tear gassed. And this article was written in 2019. Some of the prisoners, including one of his clients, considered the hole to be preferable to the unbearable degradation of being forced to pick cotton on a plantation at the end of the 20th century.
Wow.
And so I looked into a little bit of the history, and Angola has always been terrible. Um, Up through like the Great Depression, they didn't have a lot of money going on, so it sounded like they're just like throwing people into this prison and being like, good luck.
Mm.
There were 11 prisoners around the Great Depression who cut their own Achilles heels in order to like bring attention to what was going on in Angola, which is nuts to me because I think if you cut your Achilles heel, like that's kind of it. Like that's a big statement to be making.
Yeah. I mean, it hurts when I just hit it.
Uh, the so Louisiana has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. There are 1 in 55 adults behind bars. Angola is one of the largest employers in the state. They have a staff of 1,600 people and an annual budget of 120 million. Yeah.
Then
Then
in business.
yeah, 3/4 of the prisoners are Black. They worked the land by hand. They earned between 2 and 20 cents an hour. 2 and 20 cents an hour. They grow cotton, corn, soybeans, fruits, vegetables. They have like herds of cattle, and they have horses that they raise, and then they have a rodeo. Okay, so I'm looking at Wikipedia, right? And it's got the thing on the side, and it says like Angola rodeo, and I was like, huh. So I looked into that a little bit more. And every year for I think 2 months, it's like 8 weekends, they hold a rodeo, which like outside people can come in, they pay money to watch this rodeo. Um, all of the events involve inmates except for one. Um, and so the interesting thing is some people paint it as like this is a fun thing that they do, but also you sort of wonder, do the prisoners have control about being in it?
Mm-hmm.
One of the events, one of the games is getting a poker chip off of like between the eyes of a bull. And if you get the chip, you get $500. So if you're making 2 cents an hour and you get the opportunity to get $500 and just like tangle with an angry bull, you might go for it, right?
Yeah.
Apparently, it's very bloody and like rodeos in a whole, even if it rodeos when you're being paid to do it are a little disturbing. Rodeos when you're an inmate and you're going for it because that's your opportunity, or maybe you're being forced to.
Yeah. That's
Yeah. And there's a lot of Angola has always tried to do a really good job on like controlling their publicity, and
Mm-hmm.
things have gotten so much better. So there are a lot of articles about the good that they have done.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously this documentary with Oprah about the hospice that they have, but there's also stories that start to leak out. So some of the stories that are coming out now are about the healthcare. And so there's a story about a man who wakes up in pain one day, and it doesn't go away, and he complains and he asks for medical attention, and he doesn't get it, and he's denied for 3 years until he's finally seen by a doctor, and he has, I think, kidney cancer, and he
Mm.
dies from it, which apparently is one of the easier cancers. If you catch it early, is really easy.
Yeah.
And then right now with COVID, um, there are some stories coming out of that as well, as far as like the prison has tests to administer, but the prisoners are saying that they aren't, no one's getting tested, that they don't get masks, that there are too many people to keep 6 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of cell blocks that have been condemned that prisoners are disappearing into, and nobody knows like how many prisoners, but nobody's like coming out. So like, and it's one of these things that it's easy to ignore, right?
Yeah.
But it's really terrifying, and if you want to look further into it, it's a bananas circus of bananas.
Of things that are awful. Uh, that's crazy. So I mean, my family is from Louisiana. I think I've heard of it. And I've heard that, like, just from family, like, it's not a place you want to go.
During one of the hurricanes, like post Katrina, the governor of Louisiana, I guess, got on the news or something and was like, if anyone riots, it's straight to Angola. Like,
Yeah.
no trials, I don't care if you were caught rioting. Like, so there's also the fear of God thing, like,
Mhm.
built into it because it is terrible and has been terrible since it opened, I think.
That's nuts. I'll have to look through that some more. Well, like I say that, and part of me is like, I don't want it. I don't want
Yeah.
it. But I think it's a good thing to look into. And I think when it comes to Louisiana specifically, I have a lot of feelings about Louisiana. I love Louisiana. My family's from there. Um, but when you look at like the population in Louisiana, it is it's pretty heavily black. Like
Yeah.
there are a lot of black people in Louisiana. Um, but when you look at its government, it's predominantly white.
That's interesting. I wonder how that works out.
Yeah, it is interesting. um, so And then, I mean, there's other things like New Orleans government has always been fucked up because casinos and gambling and stealing money and whatnot. But it's one of those states that, excuse me, really interests me in like how their politics work
Sure.
because they have such a large minority population. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. Um, so now that we've talked about what happens, what the system was built on, and what happens when you get to prison, if you, I'm going to talk about if you make it there. So, in America, police brutality is the highest among developed countries. Most of the time, when they talk about developed countries, you're talking about Europe. And my assumption, they just say Europe. I'm assuming they don't mean Russia. Like,
Sure.
like we're talking like France and Spain and England. um, but it's the America has the highest rate of per police brutality in developed countries. So I looked at one study that was done, and this was from 2015 to November of 2020. So we're talking pretty recent numbers here.
Yeah.
Um, so um, for fatal shootings in America, 33 people per million, 33 people black per million are likely to be shot by the police. Now, that sounds like, well, 33 per million people doesn't sound like a lot, right? There are only 42 million black people in America. So that's almost one per million, if not. So, like, you have to do the math in your brain. um, and so then for Hispanics, it's 25 people per million with a population of 39 million. And for whites, it is 13 per million with a population of 197 million people.
Yeah. That number is so vastly different.
So, yeah, those numbers are huge in comparison. um, this article looked at fatal shootings and then it looked at the likelihood, like if you're a black male, how likely are you to get shot by the police?
Oh.
So, one in every 1,000 black males are likely to be killed by the police over their lifetime, with the peak age for that being between 20 and 35.
Okay. Ooh.
Ooh, yeah. It's so that's like we're talking about, fear, right? So this is the fear, and the fear is based in real numbers, right? It's based in actuality. It's not like black people are like, like it's really happening. It is really happening. Um, so then like they broke it down. Black men are 2.5 times more likely than whites to be killed by the police.
Ooh.
Black women are 1.4 times more likely. Um, I was really surprised, like the Native American population, like black and, or sorry, Native American population, men and women,
Yeah.
um, are somewhere between 2.1 and 1.1 times more likely. I think that's something we don't talk about a whole lot is like the Native American population, and I think we that's a conversation that needs to be happening also
Yeah.
because they are also treated like shit. In some cases more so. um, but I thought that was really interesting because I guess the thought is, or my thought was like they live like most Native American populations live on reservations, and so my thought was like, well, they have their own police. Surely they're not killing each other. So these killing this is when they leave the reservation, right? They go into town for something
Oh, okay.
and they get killed.
That would be, my assumption as well would be like it would be lower because they tend to live in a community together.
Mhm.
That's scary.
Yes. So another thing that I thought was really interesting is that Latin American women are 23% less likely than white women to be shot by the police.
Oh,
I can't, I was reading this number and I kept reading it and I, I mean, I'm not complaining by any stretch of the imagination, but I can't think of a reason. So if you're watching this video and you like, oh, this is why, like, please tell me because I like racking my brain for how that works. um, but anyway, I thought that was really interesting that Latin American women are less likely to be shot by the police, even than white women.
because white women like never get hurt by the police, which is why it's so different. Huh.
So women, like in general, women and men, women's rates are around 20 times lower than men's rates.
Yeah.
Like even among black, like women are less likely to be shot by the police overall. um, but within that number, black women and Native American women are at the top. So black women, it's somewhere between 2.4 and 5.4 per 100,000 black women. So per 100,000, like at the highest, five of them will be killed by the police. And with Native American women, and this was another shocking number for me, um, 4.2 per 100,000. So Native American women are just as likely to be killed by the police as black women.
Yikes.
Okay, I was gonna say, can you still hear me? Because you got like super grainy on my computer, but we're still good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's fine. I just wanted to make sure like I wasn't frozen. Like sitting here talking to myself. You're like, I can't hear you. um, but yeah, so I found like um I guess when you I would think, I would hope those of you who are listening, when you hear these numbers, you realize why there's a Black Lives Matter movement in America. Be where black people, people of color, are literally being killed by the people who are supposed to protect us.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why there is a movement. And I know there are people out there who don't like the organization, and that's fine. But as a movement, as a whole, it's calling, and a lot of the articles that I read said that like all of like the protests and the movements and everything that's sort of going on with Black Lives Matter as a movement has called a lot of attention to these numbers. Something that was really interesting when I was looking at these um, is that police don't keep these records.
Wait, what?
The police don't keep these numbers.
Who's keeping them?
So when this one organization, so it's PNAS, it's
Okay.
a scientific journal, and the link will be at the bottom. um, so they mention in their like synopsis, like, where did we get our numbers? Um, a lot of their numbers come from journalists who are filling in the gap
Uh,
because the police don't keep record. Like the police don't study this phenomenon in-house. And so journalists have had to go and investigate, and that's where they get these numbers from. So like
that's
the
insane.
police are completely unaware that the numbers are so high because they don't do any studies themselves on what's happening. And so with the Black Lives Matter movement, that is the journalists have like taken the initiative to go in and do research on these numbers and provide them to scientific people who can study them.
Not for journalists.
Yeah.
My God.
There. I know some of you probably, but the media, I'm like, it's not, don't do that. Just don't do that. Anyway, so I found that, like, it's really, it's one of those, like we were saying earlier, like, I know it's bad, but I didn't know how bad it was, right? Um, and I think that's a lot of people. I know that on my Facebook, I've had conversations with people who are like, well, it was never this bad. Like, this is a new phenomenon. This is a recent phenomenon. Like, it hasn't always been like this. Um, and it has. It has always been like this. What is making it more prominent now is that pretty much everyone has a cell phone and dash cams and body cams. Um, and so you're just seeing it. You're
Yep.
seeing it more. It's not happening more. You're seeing it more because people are watching.
I think it's really, really common when the police show up or when there's a confrontation with police that passerbys are trying to pull out their phones. And I know it's hard to stand there and film, but I'm grateful to those people. I really am. Because I think one of the things that happens is that cops are like, oh, I need to not beat the shit out of this person because I'm being watched.
Somebody's watching me.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a video, it popped up a while ago. I think he was a basketball player. Um, and the police stopped him and he was, doing and he like noticed right out of his peripheral that there was a white woman sitting in her car with her phone out.
Okay.
And she sat there and she watched the whole interaction and she waited until until he got back in his car and was ready to drive away, and she like gave him a wave, and he was in his video very emotional, like, thank you so much for being there and for watching and for having my back. And I think that's important. And I think when we have conversations of like, how can we stop this, right? I think watching and being vigilant is a good start. You know, when you see something, like I remember I was pulled over once in Missouri, and three cop cars showed up.
Oh my God. For little you?
It was terrifying. It was terrifying. He pulled me over because I was swerving.
Okay.
Um, there was ice on the ground. I'm from Texas. I'm not really great driving on ice. But that's why he pulled me over. And yeah, three cop cars showed up, and um, it was just a very scary moment. I think it's really important, like when you think about these numbers, talk to your black friends and ask them questions, because for me in that moment, like that was my thought, like this is how I die. Like I wasn't doing anything, but I'm gonna die. um, and I think it's important, when people are, well, he was resisting or he was doing that. I think some of that resisting is fear based, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Like, you're going to kill me.
Yeah.
And there people have different reactions to that emotion,
Yeah.
right?
So let's put it like fight or flight with that.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, and also resisting arrest is not a reason to kill somebody. It's just not. It just isn't.
I think that's the thing with recent cop killings is this jump to pull your gun and to shoot someone, or like, was that the best thing you could have done? Like you guys aren't taught to like talk to suspects anymore, or and sort of going back to inherent biases, they did a study with police officers. So there are these games you can play, right? And one of them is like you see people, different people with guns, and like who do you shoot? And so they did this with the cops. And the cops were slightly better at not shooting black bystanders without guns, but they were faster at shooting black people with guns than white people. So with white people, they hesitate, and with black people, there's no question.
No question.
Uh, and it's scary that like the people who are patrolling the streets and keeping us safe have an automatic reaction.
Right. And I think it's part of, this whole like defund the police, which is bad sloganeering. Just it's a horrible slogan. Because that's not what the majority of people are saying when they say that. But like a lot of what people want to do is have police officers be well trained and have a standard of training, like if they're training police here and there's I don't know how it works, like if you move states, but if you move counties, like if you're a Dallas County police officer and you were trained one way and you move out to El Paso, um, I I don't think they retrain you. You just move. You just move to a new city.
Yeah.
And so if there's not like a standard within a state of how you're trained,
Right.
then how do you know how to deal with different situations in different cities or places?
Yeah.
Or if there's not, if you take that, from state to state, if there's not a standard, then how do you know, you
Yeah.
know, like what kind of officer you're getting?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Um, so I think that's something when I think when those people think of defund the police, those are things that are like front of mind. Like they need better training. The instinct shouldn't be to pull your gun and shoot someone.
Yeah.
Uh, so, oh, so I was gonna say just another little personal story. um, when in Dallas, I worked for an organization that worked with the LGBTQ community. And in Dallas, for a little while, there were a lot of hate crimes in the area against the community, and so people were worried. And we had a police officer come in and give us some basic training. Like he didn't like teach us how to de-arm anybody or whatever, but just sort of like these are things you can do to protect yourself, right? And someone in our meeting asked him, "What if I kill someone? What if
Oh.
someone is attacking me and I kill them?" And his response was, "I was afraid for my life."
Ooh.
And I don't know about how everybody else felt in the room, but I like raged.
Yeah.
Like I was so sad and so angry because that's what they say.
Yeah. Every, like if you go and watch every single police shooting, the police will say, I was afraid for my life. I didn't know what was gonna happen. I thought I was gonna die. There's like some line like that. I can't believe he said that.
Yep. It's like that's what you say. Like it's like if you didn't mean to, if someone attacks you and you end up killing them,
I was afraid for my life.
I was afraid for my life. And I was just like,
That's insane.
like you just said that. um, so it, it for me, like I said, like rage, just like rage and anger and like sadness.
Oh my God.
um, so I'm like, oh, so that's what they tell you. That's what they tell you to say.
Like the cops at this point know that that line works, and they will say it every fucking time because it does work.
Because it does work. Yep.
Oh man.
So that's my little personal story about my interactions with police. Not to say all of my interactions with police have been horrible. I've had very nice police officers, and I want like you just put this out there. I don't think all police officers are bad or all police officers are murderers. I don't think so. I think that's all I have.
Okay.
Unless I don't know if there are any final thoughts or like anything that like stuck out to you. as far as like privilege is concerned, or like how do you feel when you get pulled over by the police?
Okay, so really quickly, I feel differently now than I did like last year. Pulled over recently, but my idea of the cops now versus a year ago is very, very different.
Wow.
And also, I wanted to say to everyone who is watching that next week we're going to do sort of a wrap up, and we're going to include steps you can take. So things like listening to your friends and watching the black guy with the cop and pulling out your camera kind of ideas. So I think next week is going to be a good wrap up and good like tips, I guess.
Yeah, things you can do to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
As well as like things that we have learned and hope that you've taken away from our little 4-part series here about privilege.
And we're going to read a book over Christmas break, so stay tuned for the book.
Stay tuned for the book that we pick. If you have a suggestion for a book, hit me up on Facebook because we're still discussing it. So if you have something you really feel like we should read, let us know. So that's all we've got. Thank you guys for listening. As always, don't be a racist and wash your hands.